And I very want to take the time to thank Pastor Steve Littlefield and the Simonton Community Church for opening their doors for us. They always are there for us, and we very, very much appreciate Steve and his staff. They were here early this morning to open up and prepare all this for us, and they're so generous to the community and such a vital part of the Simonton community. So I do want to do that. And with that, we're going to have Chris is going to be explaining things. The moderator, you're going to hear from our county attorney and our county drainage district engineer. And here comes Dr. Zerwas, who's going to, Doc, you don't get to stand in the back. You got to come up to the front.
Yes, sir.
For those of you who may not know him, this is your state representative, Dr. John Zerwas. And we very much appreciate you taking your valuable time to be here this morning.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we're going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to go through everything. Chris, you're up.
Is this better? That's pretty loud. We're good? All right. Anybody in the back, just wave if it gets out of hand. We're going to go through a recent timeline of events. And people have asked questions about how this developed, and we're going to go through and talk about starting in 2017 and 2018. As many of y'all remember last year, even going back into the year 2017, there's a lot of national discussion, all the various hurricanes, Puerto Rico, California, Florida, things that were happening on a national scale. There was an unprecedented number of requests for federal funding. And through the legislation in Congress, through the support of our senators, our representatives, Texas was able to secure a good amount. And there's been a lot of discussion in the news ever since about protecting that amount. But as that money has funneled down to Texas, there have been billions of dollars that have been made available for helping with flood mitigation projects coming down from the federal government and being distributed to the Texas Department of Emergency Management, or TDEM. And I'll use that acronym again throughout this presentation. But TDEM is helping to distribute that money directly into communities that were impacted. In 2018, Fort Bend County submitted applications to TDEM for flood mitigation grants under the direction of including only shovel-ready projects. And that limited the amount of applications that were turned in because of using the definition of shovel-ready projects, meaning a project where there were engineering plans already in hand, the land already belongs to the county or to the operation that would be doing the work or making a structure improvement. A shovel-ready project was the definition of what was turned in for a TDEM application. In January this year, 2019, January 19th, 2019, Commissioner Precinct 3, Andy Myers, learned from an outside engineering consultant who's also here today that the TDEM application process was not limited to shovel-ready projects. And the consultant engineer who informed him about this is somebody who had also worked on successful applications within the city of Pasadena, and they had received a 9-figure application successfully for projects they have over in the city of Pasadena. The deadline for those submissions was January 31st, 2019, and the deadline had already been extended. The final deadline we asked to be extended again for more time. We were denied. Other municipalities, other counties were also asking for that deadline to be extended. It was denied. January 31st was a hard deadline submitted by the Texas Department of Emergency Management for those applications to be turned in. On January 29th, after a few frantic days, we'd like to thank the county judge, the Office of Emergency Management, county engineers, county attorneys, road and bridge, everybody that pitched in and helped over that 10-day period to help pull together the structure for submitting applications for projects. And we understand that these projects are simply in the application process right now and have received word from TDEM that they've received an overwhelming number of applications. The competition is underway. It is a statewide competition for that money. It is a competitive process that our area is under, along with all the other counties and municipalities that were damaged by Hurricane Harvey and the events of 2017. But on January 29th, the Commissioners Court voted to authorize the submissions after the review of the county OEM and the county judge. The Commissioners Court also approved resolutions of support for legislation to create flood control districts for Jones Creek and Bessie's Creek. On January 31st, the applications were finalized and submitted to TDEM. TDEM had some comments. There was some back and forth between the county, but those were finally submitted. Those are in the hands of the Texas Department of Emergency Management today. On February 5th, Representative Zerwas' office returned draft legislation to Fort Bend County on the flood control districts. And on February 6, 2019, a 30-day notice of intent to create the districts was publicly filed, a requirement. Anytime a special district is created, you must publish notice publicly of the 30-day period. That was on February 6th. On February 20th, 2019, so just a couple weeks ago now, Representative Zerwas announced that after community input, he was going to pull down the Bessie's Creek legislation, but the Jones Creek legislation would continue. for a little bit of history, on the Jones Creek side, somewhere that I personally do live inside that watershed, this community has issued almost unanimous support for the Jones Creek legislation, and Dr. Zerwas will be carrying that legislation. It has been filed. That bill was filed on March 7th, just 2 days ago, and that Jones Creek Flood Control District bill that Dr. Zerwas is carrying is HB 4011. That bill has been filed. A bill to create a special district in Bessie's Creek has not been filed. That bill would have been filed concurrently if it was going to go through. It has not been filed. The TDM application for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and you'll see if you ever have the copies of these things, if you want to look at this, there's a lot of acronyms, a lot of different paperwork floating around, but the TDM application for Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Application deadline, as I said, January 31st, 2019. Projects that are approved by TDM, that they come back to us and say, let's proceed, let's move forward. They're allowed a 1-year period for the engineering study for input and review. A 1-year period after TDM comes back and says, let's move forward, let's partner and see what we can do to help you in the community. The grants provide federal funds equaling 75% of the overall project costs. So 75% of any project that TDM seeks to partner with the community, 75% of that will be funded by federal dollars. The grants require a funding source to cover a 25% local match. So essentially we're looking at 3-to-1 federal dollars to local dollars to undertake these projects. An option for the local match, currently in the state of Texas and Fort Bend County, we would be looking at potentially 3 options, and Dr. Zerwas can speak more to this if you have questions for him about that. But there have been public comments made by Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and other people in the House and State Senate who are currently in session right now for the first time since Harvey, that options could be potentially rainy day funds being drawn down. There's been numbers in a bill filed currently right now by Senator Creighton from up in the Montgomery County area that would draw down money to help cover that local match. In other words, state funds in the rainy day fund could be used to either cover all or a portion of the local match necessary to match those federal funds if a TDM application is approved for a community. The other options would be for a county to provide those funds, in which case, unless the county has that in a bank account, they would most likely call a bond election, a county-wide vote, to authorize funding for that local match, or a special district. Special districts having bonding authority, and as most people in Fort Bend County are aware, some 94% of Fort Bend County residents are either living inside of a special district or living inside of the city limits with that same power. Only 6% of the population, many of which is in this area, however, does not live in city limits or does not live inside the boundaries of a MUD or a levee improvement district. And I'm sorry, MUD is a municipal utility district. LID, levee improvement district. Again, some acronyms, MUD and LID. But only 6% of the population lives outside city limits or not inside of a MUD or a LID that would have the power to be in a position to make bond applications or go to voters for a bond to help provide a local match for that 25%. The TDM application details for Bessie's Creek would be a 200+ acre detention basin at the upper end of the watershed on undevelopable land. The submitted calculations were that in a 100-year rain event, a professional engineer who submitted and reviewed this foresees a 620 CFS reduction to reduce water surface elevation by 2 feet. The total cost of the project as submitted was $27.5 million, which would require a $6.87 million local share and a $20.62 million 75% match with federal funds. And again, a 200+ acre detention basin at the upper end of the watershed on undevelopable land.
Where on the map?
I have more maps coming through. The most likely landowner to benefit from this would be the Twinwood development because they have the most acreage in the properties along Bessie's Creek. It's some 17,000 acres. They are owners of significant acreage immediately adjacent to Bessie's Creek in both Waller and Fort Bend County. And the Twinwood development already has at least 3 MUDs in inactive status that are currently listed, and there's more, I understand, that have been filed or are going to be filed in this legislative session. All of these MUDs have eminent domain authority, and these MUDs will eventually become activated and become controlled by the developer and developer boards. However, Commissioner Myers has approached the owners and has approached them about what land would be available and asked if they would be willing to work with anybody, be it a county, be it a special district, to identify the hydrology and the engineering that would be able to be used for a detention basin on that undevelopable land. And again, this would be land that could not be used for development because it falls within the floodway, or it falls in an area that could not be used for traditional development in the area. It would not be on high ground. It would be down at a low point identified through the engineering study. At this point, the engineering study has not been done. That is the point of the TDEM application. The application process is designed to give us the ability to go in and study that particular question, where it makes the most sense. And this is something where I could bring in Mark Vogler if I could. Mark, could you come up and help me talk about this just a little bit? This is Mark Vogler, the Fort Bend County Drainage District Chief Engineer, with an encyclopedic knowledge of the area. Mark, could you give us a little bit more information about what happens and what would be advantageous in this scenario?
Okay, Bessie Creek watershed, as most of you know, that extends up into Waller County. And to provide the most protection for the most property in the Bessie Creek watershed in Fort Bend County, we would need to put this detention facility up in the very upper limits of the county to capture the water before it comes down through us and reduce the peak flow rate, as the application said, reduce it by about 600 plus cubic feet per second. That's it. That's enough to answer your question.
The parcels, it's public knowledge, the parcels of land up there are primarily owned by Twinwood, as the county line, as you know, comes down through. That's simply where Bessie's Creek is geographically located. That's where the good Lord has put it. On the next map, I can show you. Mark sent me this information yesterday. Bessie's Creek itself has been studied at different times. In Waller County, on their side of the line, Bessie's Creek has been studied a few years ago, I believe it was. You said the FEMA map had been redrawn to illustrate the 100-year floodplain of Waller County, and FEMA has just this week sent Mark the updated floodplain map for the current 100-year floodplain. And so, preliminary, very preliminary, but this was the preliminary 100-year floodplain map that has been submitted back to the County Drainage District from FEMA.
Sir, before we get too far off, when are you going to file the grant for Bessie Creek? You filed the grant for the other, when you live here?
The application for the grant has been filed. Both of those have been filed with TDEM.
Oh, the one's been approved and one hasn't.
The grant process is still ongoing. TDEM has not approved any grants yet. They have a large amount that has been submitted. No one, to my knowledge, has yet received feedback that they have been approved or unapproved for those applications that were made on January 31st. The process for those being approved is going to take some months. I don't have any definitive timeline of when that will be. We just simply don't.
I think she's asking about the legislation.
The legislation, I'm sorry. As you know, the legislature only meets every 2 years. This is the first time they've met since Harvey. They are currently in the middle of their 140 days, smack dab in the middle of their 140 days. The Jones Creek legislation has been filed. And Dr. Zerwas, the last day to file legislation for any bill is rapidly approaching, correct? It's passed?
But for local bills, there's no deadline.
Right. This would be a local bill, so there would be no deadline for that. However, the Jones Creek legislation has been introduced, the Bessie's Creek has not.
What's the difference between if the legislation has been introduced and the Bessie's Creek thing with a parallel?
The way the county views it is somewhat of a parallel track. If there's no, let's take a best case scenario and say that we get funding to help protect our residents, and y'all are worth it. But let's say we get federal funding, a 75% match, to cover 3/4 of the cost of a project. The other quarter of a project we have to have identified. And if the state were able to provide that match, the state is going to have to pass a bill this legislative session authorizing that to be done. And that's something that they're currently discussing. There's legislation in the works for that state match. If the county were to provide that match, that would be a parallel track that would have to be established further down the road, because right now we're hoping for the best case scenario that the state is able to cover that in the rainy day fund.
Best case for who?
That's the questions for the legislature.
It's not for everybody in here. I can guarantee you.
All right. The best case scenario, if you were looking to get the 25% match, if you believe that's the best way, would be the state rainy day fund. That would be covered out of the state funds already existing.
What are the odds of that?
That's a question for Dr. Zerwas, I believe.
Will you make the slides available publicly?
I will, yes. This will be posted on.
Something.
This will be posted online, yes, sir. And we'll adapt as we get other questions here today with feedback. The other scenario would be the county making a bond application, and the county has certain limits that they must do. It has to fall on a uniform election date, so it has to fall either on a May election or a November election. And the earliest opportunity you would have for that would be in November, or at another time in another general election, such as May 2020 or November 2020. You're very familiar with how you have these cycles of elections with special districts. And then if it was a special district, they would also be held to the same requirement. A board would have to be formed, a board would have to call an election, and the board would have to have the election on a uniform election date also. So that would be the process. Each of these steps will take a certain amount of time. Anything that you're doing with the Texas legislature has to be done during the 140 days that they've met. This is the first time that the legislature has met during Harvey, and they're currently 2 months into their process. Let me go through and talk about something real quick, because Atlas 14 is one of the primary reasons that we're here today. And it's something that the community has only recently become aware of, because its maps were only preliminarily released last fall. But Atlas 14 is going to raise the 100-year rainfall event in Fort Bend County by 4 inches in a 24-hour period. Right now, the 100-year rainfall event in Fort Bend County, under the current definition by NOAA, is 12.5 inches. And that is the standard amount of rainfall that is used in all hydrology models, all engineering studies and plans when there's new development, or when anybody's looking to put in fill or work through the drainage district or work through county engineering. They have to build roadways, they have to build homes, they have to build subdivisions and developments to the 100-year rainfall standard, currently 12.5 inches. Atlas 14 has been announced, and if adopted at that rate, will raise it by 4 inches in a 24-hour period. So you can see a 32% increase. That will have a tremendous amount of impact upon the amount of things that are required for any developments. The subdivision that has to do what was in the past a 10-acre detention basin for the development, that will have to be increased by that 32%. If you're looking to build up your home to a certain level, you're going to have to raise up your home that same amount. There's going to be impacts that the county will have to be using with anybody who's looking to do development in the area. That's also going to have implications for things like homeowners insurance rates, for flood insurance. And as you can see, and we talked about this a second ago, FEMA is always redrawing the maps of what a 100-year floodplain event is. And some of you may live in an area that was under a previous map, not in a 100-year floodplain. There are people living here in some of these areas in white, for example, that are not currently in a 100-year floodplain. If nothing is done and there's no additional flood mitigation in the area, a 32% increase on that 100-year floodplain map will put more citizens in Fort Bend County inside a 100-year floodplain. So the cost of flood insurance for people will go from the $480, I just paid $480 myself for flood insurance on my home, which is near Jones Creek. And if I'm drawn into a 100-year floodplain, that'll go up to $4,000 or more per year. And that's the cost of flood insurance that you're required to have if you have a mortgage upon your home. So there are steps that many developers and special districts do, and the reason that many special districts exist in Fort Bend County, area that used to be pasture or rice paddies, or, you know, a lot of y'all lived here for years like me, you know exactly what most of this area was like before it was developed. It's flat, it's designed to hold water in some instances, and the amount of earthwork and engineering that has to be done to satisfy the federal requirements and keep us out of those floodplains is often many, many millions of dollars. What we are trying to do and what other districts are trying to do across Fort Bend County is to get a handle upon what these new lines are going to be like. And right now it's an educated guess because FEMA will not have those maps for some years. We know that the new amount is going to be raised by 4 inches in a 24-hour period. We do not have the maps yet from FEMA about what that's going to look like, but we know that without individual mitigation steps that are being taken by certain communities around Fort Bend County, other special districts, any new development, that they're going to try and make their educated guesses with their engineers, with their consultants upon what that might be. You have a question, ma'am? You've had your hand up in a while.
Yes. I'd just like to say, sir, that I believe that you're incorrect on the $4,000 because I do not have flood insurance prior to Harvey, and my flood insurance in Valley Lodge is only $1,400. So
Okay.
I believe that $4,000 is way off.
Okay.
I also have recently got flood insurance and had to rebuild a home and whatnot. And have, at 4 feet, above 4 feet above ground level, it was going to be $2,400 a year. And they told me if I'd add a foot to that, it would take it down to $800 a year.
Would it be fair for me to say that it would vary for people in different areas based upon the condition of your home,
Right.
based upon your property? I think that'd be a fair assessment that flood insurance rates rise based upon whether or not you were drawn into the district, drawn out of the floodplains, many different factors. I'd like to move forward if I can and remind people that we're going to be running up against a time limit as we work with the churches and the various funerals that are here today. And there are other people up here that you elect and that you should hear from also. Something to look through real quick, especially speaking with the mayor this morning, and thank you for that time this morning. I appreciate your time, Mayor Boudreaux. The Brazos River, of course. This is a map that's available publicly on the Drainage District website. It's a model of the Brazos River inundation map, the river height of 56 feet at the Richmond gauge. And I don't have to tell y'all have seen this year after year after year for the past 3 or 4 years about what the Brazos River does. The height, the water, the inundation that can occur at those various level heights. This is the Brazos River inundation map at 56 feet. And you can go online to the Drainage District and see how far that this inundation map comes when you reach that height, which we have seen approaching that level in the recent floods of the last 4 years. And then let's talk about the flood district legislation briefly. As I mentioned, every 2 years for 140 days. We understand all too well because we were caught in this, and we were having this community meeting today, and believe me, I was on vacation. My wife was hitting me because I was writing emails about this last weekend. We have a lot of overlap right now that has crunched the calendar. It crunched the calendar when it was announced that the deadline for the applications was January 31st, which we found out about 10 days before they were due. The crunch happened because we're currently in the middle of a legislative session where there's a scramble for bills, over 7,000, 8,000 bills that are currently being filed in the Texas House. Local bills out the wazoo. We've got local flood control districts out throughout Fort Bend County here. Many areas of the state don't have that model. If you go up to Dallas County is covered 99-point-something% by cities. And they don't do special districts. They don't have the same development model that exists here in Fort Bend County. But what happened here in Fort Bend County due to the proximity to Houston, the Fort Bend County Drainage District came into existence some 60 years ago. And at the time, this was a mostly rural agrarian county. And the idea behind the flood control district, behind the drainage district in the 50s when it was launched was to provide a way for keeping the canals and the ditches and the bayous clear from vegetation, to keep them desilted, to help establish only a minimum repairs, minimum upkeep. And that's the model that the county has used in its development. It's going from only a few, 50,000 residents some number of years ago to where we're at 750,000 today and projected to hit 1 million over the next 10 years. There are currently some 300 plus municipal utility districts in Fort Bend County. There's 21 levee improvement districts. There's a major drainage district, the Willowport Drainage District, that exists over the Cinco Ranch area. All of these districts provide some measure of local control for the residents, for the developments, for the homes, for the people that live there, based upon what happens in their own individual geographic area. And that's the model that Fort Bend County has grown so rapidly under. That doesn't exist here. And it's easy to go onto any map or to any map provided by government and see where those districts are and see how the growth has occurred, how those special districts pop up. As I mentioned just a minute ago, there are more coming all the time. There's mud districts that exist over different areas here along 1489 that just aren't activated yet. And they will be coming. But the point of all these districts, these 300 plus districts, these levee improvement districts, is to give citizens local control over what's happened. The idea behind filing legislation for Jones Creek, for Bessie's Creek, to have a flood control district, is to allow the citizens to have their own voice about what happens, to be able to let you maintain the future of your own community, an elected board. Yes, sir?
You're talking about local control. We have Gulf Coast Water Authority that's using Jones Creek. Is the local flood control district going to have control over what Gulf Coast does, or are they going to not have to abide by the rules?
Well, contractual law supersedes anything, and my understanding about that, Mark can speak to this if you want to, Mark, Gulf Coast Water Authority, the various other water contracts that are out there are decades old, in some cases 70, 80 years old. Those are 100-year contracts, 100-year plus contracts. Things that have been negotiated for surface water rights are not impacted by the special districts. There's nothing that the legislature can do to overturn contract law.
If they contribute to our flooding, they can just continue to contribute to our flooding. We can't do anything about it if we have a flood control district.
No, sir, those are things that are worked out directly with the legislature. They're worked out directly with Mark. Let me have you speak briefly on
The Gulf Coast Water Authority has policies on how they pump water, when they cut their pumps off and on. any design that would be done on Jones Creek to compensate or take care of flooding issues would take into consideration Gulf Coast Water Authority's plan of operation. So if they pump water at a certain level, we would make channel improvements that would allow that pumping to continue at that level, but ensure that the flood control that is put in place would okay, if you have some better information, I'd be happy to hear it. But that's what Gulf Coast Water Authority do, is they would pump their water. They've got a spillway that they pump only to a certain level. If they pump higher than that, the water would spill over and run right back in the river, so they control that so that it doesn't exceed that spillway elevation. And again, when the rains occur, they cut their pumping systems off. They can take the rainwater and let it flow. If it's a very low rain event, they can let that water flow on into their storage system if they want to. That's a choice they have. But again, if a design is done on Jones Creek, it would be done in compliance and in coordination with Gulf Coast Water Authority, so our system could function as well as their system.
And our county attorney, Roy Cordes, could you speak quickly about the contract law with those contracts?
Well, Mark said, I'm Roy Cordes, I'm Fort Bend County Attorney. Our office has been working with Commissioner Myers and others on the legislation. In response to the question, as I understand it, Gulf Coast Water Authority has a contract to access water out of the Brazos River. They can pump water out. And Mark is correct in saying anything that the proposed flood control district can do is going to be subject to those contractual rights of Gulf Coast Water Authority.
He's a county attorney. I can't do any higher. I apologize if y'all disagree, but he's a county attorney. I can't do any better for you today. Yes, sir.
Two questions that you raised here. One is with regard to keeping the flood, the ways open, the drainage ways open. Bessie Creek hasn't apparently been touched in years. It's severely overgrown, and even now, if that was cleared out, it would substantially improve things over there.
That's a good question. I'm going to ask Mark to say something real quick, and to remind everybody that the county drainage district can only work in areas where they have easements, but Mark can speak very well.
Keep in mind what Chris said earlier, when the drainage district was formed back in 1950, we were predominantly a rural agricultural community. And at that time, they had a bond election to make channel improvements in certain areas up to certain size channel capacities. And those capacities were, I think it was 3 inches on cropland, 2 inches on pasture land, and 1 inch of rainfall on rural land in a 24-hour time period. That's what those channels were designed to carry, and that's what we're maintaining to today. We maintain the channels where we have easements. We don't have continuous easements on all channels at all locations. On Bessie's Creek, we maintain the James Lane. We have easements below James Lane, but we don't maintain below that because the erosion was getting so significant that we weren't able to control the channel and stop the erosion. It was progressing upstream of James Lane toward 1093. We made corrections on that about 7 or 8 years ago. Got in trouble with the Corps of Engineers for doing maintenance on our channel on that issue and battled that for 3 years. Our easements also end. I don't know how many of you are here. I was born and raised here, but there used to be a Mullins property over here just north of 1093. There was a dam on the Mullins property, and that's where our easements ended, that dam. It's upstream of Pool Hill Road, downstream of 1489. That's the limits of our maintenance easements.
Somebody else had it. Yes, sir. Your second question.
One more question was, in Harris County, they required the developers, in this case, the people who have 1,200 acres, why are they not being requested to furnish far more water control than they are currently?
The timing on that will be coming online, but let me, Commissioner, have you spoken, as somebody who's spoken with the developer for Twinwood about the detention?
Repeat the question again.
Harris County requires flood developments on every piece of property to retain water so that it doesn't hit the system. So, what's being done with Twinwood?
Well, Twinwood, first of all, counties have very limited authority under the law, under statute. A county is a subdivision of the state. Unlike a city, a county does not have ordinance-making powers. It doesn't have, we can't make laws, we can't make rules. We have to go to the legislature and get specific legislation to allow a county to do anything it does. If it's not provided for in the legislature that says a county may or can do such and such, the assumption is that they can't do anything that is not specifically provided for in the statute, first of all. Second of all, the county, and I'll have Mark address this a little bit, but the county does require every developer to detain have detention and a storm sewer system within their development to the point that they can only release their water at the natural undeveloped flow rate that had existed before the development. So if they go put a development out there, they have to put a detention pond to detain their water, and it's all determined on the basis of a 100-year event, and they cannot release the water any faster than it would have been released had it just been pasture land. So the natural undeveloped flow rate is the maximum flow rate that they can that is allowed to come off their property. So they do detain water, and that's by law, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct, Mark?
What the county requires the developers to do is they require them to provide detention so that they don't increase the peak flow rate in the channel at any point downstream. And by the peak flow rate, we will look at a 10-year event, 10-year rainfall event, a 25-year rainfall event, a 100-year rainfall event. And so in all those events, they have to show in a computer model that they don't increase the peak flow rate downstream at any point. Now it's possible that some developments are so far downstream in the watershed that they can release their water undetained and get it to the river and it doesn't cause an impact. If we have them hold their water back, and Bessie's Creek is a prime example of that, you got two high spots right in the vicinity of Pool Hill Road that constrict the flow of Bessie's Creek. Water has to funnel through these high spots. So you've got a lot of floodplain upstream of Pool Hill Road, but downstream, you've got a lot less floodplain. And if we require the folks downstream of this constriction point to hold their water back, all we're doing is causing higher water elevations for Weston Lakes and Full Brook and those areas downstream of this choke point. And so we require them to show in the models that they don't cause an impact. And that's where our policy is. They have to provide enough detention so they don't increase the peak flow rates and don't impact anybody upstream or downstream from them.
Rick? Introduce yourself.
I'm Rick Staglin with the County Engineering Department. So the county does have a requirement for what's called a development permit. If you are adding more than 100 square feet of a structure or impervious cover, concrete, asphalt, anything like that, you are required to get a permit. What makes it difficult is out here in the rural areas, because of the large tracts of lands, we can't always catch everybody. Now, you're not going to be able to get power until you come in for a permit. But for someone adding a barn that doesn't have power, things like that, unless we find it on an aerial, it is very difficult for us to catch those. If someone starts bringing in fill into the floodplain out here, it's very difficult for us to catch that. However, we do get complaints from the neighbors, and so if you've got a concern where somebody's bringing in fill that you don't think is permitted, you can email us, you can call us at engineering, we'll come out and investigate and either make them put it back to original conditions or make them come up with a mitigation plan. We are trying to help with those types of things, but like I said, we're very limited as far as having people out here finding those violations and trying to make sure that everything's done correctly.
Do we answer your question?
I don't think we're talking about individuals building a barn. We're talking about these new subdivisions that are affecting a large number.
The large developers are required, as Mark Vogler has already pointed out, to either detain their water or however they need to do it so that they do not exceed the peak flow rate of the undeveloped natural flow rate. So the developers cannot put something in and as a result of their development, flood people.
The policing aspect of that is basically the threat of lawsuit, because they have to prove under the hydrology model and make these plans available. And at any point that somebody comes through and challenges that in court, the costs of that are pretty high. And you can see after Harvey, some communities have done exactly that. Gone back and looked at some of the areas that flooded, or have had engineers look at some of the areas that flooded adjacent to their property and have filed such lawsuits. And you've heard a lot of that in the news lately. You've seen some of that in Harris County. I believe there's one instance of somewhere in an adjacent county also about that. But essentially that is one of the most effective mechanisms, because they don't want to be in a lawsuit down the road. You've had your hand up.
Yes.
Yes, sir. In the back. Yes, sir.
We're talking about retention facilities for these developments. So in theory, maybe Mark can answer this. If you go out under a heavy rain event and you look at a retention facility for a development and it's basically empty, but water's flowing out of there at a tremendous rate, it's not behaving as it's planned, right? down 723. It's not behaving as it should. Do you guys check on those things?
That's an enforcement issue for the county attorney also, but.
It's a good point. We've had a number of people that see situations like that they think the system is not functioning right, or is not being operated right. If you'll bring it to our attention, we will investigate it, and we've investigated a number of them. I'm familiar with Briscoe Falls. I have driven down 723 in the middle of the night, noticed they're pumping water, and we have checked with their engineering firm. We've gone out to the site and double checked some things, but it's possible that they may have changed again. So if you see something you don't think is right, feel free to call us.
Well, maybe everyone in this room can be your helpers.
Well, and let me point out, there's a subdivision called Polo Ranch that's coming up in this watershed, the Bessie Creek watershed. That subdivision is shown mathematically and hydraulically that they don't need to provide detention for storage for their runoff off their property. But what they have to do is provide 100+ acre-feet of floodplain storage mitigation, because they filled in the floodplain. In order that they would be displacing by that fill, they had to compensate for that. So in that situation, you won't see the pond fill up when it's raining, but as the creek fills up, water will back into their system and be stored in it.
It shouldn't be running out of their pell-mell either, should it?
Well, it should, yes, because they're trying to get their water out and into the river before the peak slug of water comes from Water County through Fort Bend County and through the controlled restricted area. But again, when this big slug of water does come down, their water's already gone out and in the river, but their water will back up into their development and be stored in there. That's the floodplain storage issue I was addressing.
Every situation is going to be different because God has made this area a lot differently. Cinda, yes.
Listen, a lot of us have submitted questions on cards. Can we please get to
Yes.
those so that
Yes.
this is reasonable? Well, no, they're on cards.
Okay.
Yes, if you could just read some of the questions on cards.
Would it be okay if I finish the last two slides here and we go to questions that are submitted? Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm going to dive right back in. Again, a lot of information out there about what has happened on bills, the legislation, in the Texas legislature that's been filed. Again, Dr. Zerwas has not filed the Bessie's Creek Flood Control District bill. It is still technically possible to file it because it is a local bill. However, there's also been a lot of information out there about what would happen if such a district were created. And if the Jones Creek District bill makes it through, there would be such a situation for the Jones Creek watershed and a district over that area. Anytime a district's created, the Commissioner's Court appoints a temporary board of 7 directors, and those are from names submitted by the community. The temporary board exists only for one purpose: to meet, gavel in, and call for an election of a permanent board by a public vote of the district residents, those inside the district boundaries. Only the publicly elected board members can call for a bond election or authorize eminent domain powers. The citizens have asked for a sunset provision on a Bessie's Creek bill. And if a bill were to be filed, it would be filed with that sunset provision. Currently, it was drafted. The first draft of that did not have that sunset legislation, but after multiple people giving input, anything that would be filed with the sunset provision, and that would be defined thusly. If there's no grant from TDEM, if there's no federal funds available, there'd be no district. There'd be no point for the district. The full sunset for that district would end on January 1st, 2022, to give a period of about 2 years for everything to be determined, for TDEM to have a chance to interact with the community, determine viability, determine the funding, and then to work through the process of getting that funding available to the community for that specific project. But the bill, if it were to go through, if the community wanted it, and if Dr. Zerwas was successful in getting that through the full legislative process over the next 70 days, the full sunset on that would be January 1st, 2022, to allow a little bit of time, just basically 2 years, 2.5 years, for that process to wind through on the paperwork from the TDEM application. The district boundaries would be determined by the engineering study. And this is something that Commissioner Myers is very firm, very public about. If a property benefits from the TDEM funded project, it would be included in the district. And there's some other questions that would exist about if there's an existing MUD, if there's existing cities, and that's something that I have our county attorney here to answer questions on if there are questions. The countywide engineering study is underway. However, this specific project for the Bessie's Creek 200+ acre detention basin would need TDEM funding to go out and directly determine where that would be. The current countywide engineering study is examining the hydrology along Bessie's Creek, how it impacts with the water that comes down from Waller County, how the water impacts it that comes out of the Brazos River and the high rain events and the flooding events along the Brazos. That study is underway. We expect that study to be done, Mark, this year.
305 days from January 1st.
305 days from January 1st, the countywide watershed study. These are the points that I want to bring to your attention on any discussion about the flood district legislation. And now let's talk about what the county and the county commissioners court can do via the county the county drainage district. The Fort Bend County Drainage District already has eminent domain authority today. It also has the right to enter without trespass and the ability to call for bond elections. The drainage district is controlled by Fort Bend County Commissioners Court, 4 county commissioners, and the county judge. You can only vote for 2 out of the 5, that being the county judge and your county commissioner precinct 3, as you currently are in precinct 3. There is no funding available currently to undertake the full cost of any flood control project on Bessie's Creek without a county-wide bond vote by the citizens. And again, as I mentioned, 76% of Fort Bend County residents already pay taxes to a MUD, a LID, or both. 18% of Fort Bend County residents live inside city limits, but not inside of a MUD or a LID. And only 6% of residents in the county live outside of city limits and outside of a MUD or LID. Those are the current things that you need to know about the drainage district and the rest of the county as they exist in a special district. That's the end of the slides. I appreciate your patience as we went through that. That will be available online for your review. We have a lot of questions that were written down. We're going to go through and start asking these.
Hey Chris, before you do that, because you'll never ask me what I want to know. Flood control district got through the Zeros, but no one in Jones Creek knows a thing about it. Can we put that one on hold and learn more about what we're up against?
We are in discussions right now about holding exactly this exact meeting in Jones Creek. Be happy to come and talk with you more.
In the house. None of us know anything. We've been left out in the dark, and I'm afraid we're not as smart as.
Well, I remember we had a meeting about this last May, and I led another one of these meetings in a room even bigger than this one. So we've had a lot of discussions. I was at the Woods Edge meeting. I saw a lot of people at the Woods Edge meeting. We've had a lot of meetings about this, and we've been very public about this with the Jones Creek Association of Neighborhoods. We're going to go through with some additional questions for the full setter here about Bessie's Creek.
All right, the first question is from Marita Siegel. If you do not receive 2/3 of the votes of support from the House of Representatives and no eminent domain can be used, does this mean that we will still have to shoulder the high taxes to pay for this project?
What's the assumption we're going to have high taxes? I mean, we don't know. As I said, the first objective is to try to get the state to fund the local match. The second thing is if we don't get any or all of the funding from the state, and they do have a bill in place that hasn't been passed yet, $1.5 billion for local match, we'll look to the county to do it. If the county is not able to because we can't pass a bond issue, we look for the local district. That's $6 million, $7 million, so that's $8 million in total. That's an assumption on our part. The taxes on the overall thing, I don't know what it's going to be because I don't know all the properties that are going to be within the district is going to be, what the taxable value is, what the total amount is. That is yet to be determined. But before we get to the point where we actually propose a bond issue, everybody will know exactly how much the bond issue is going to be. Everybody will know how much the taxable value is that will be paying those bonds, and everybody will know how much their taxes are that they will have to pay, and they are the ones that decide whether or not they're going to approve the bond issue. So it's in your control, totally, 100%. We're not going to propose something that's going to cost you $1,000 a year in taxes. That's done. But on the other hand, if it's going to cost you $60 a month, and I don't know, maybe $40 a month, I have no clue what it's going to be. Currently, you pay, on average, the homes in Fort Bend County, the average home in Fort Bend County pays an average of $25 a year in property taxes to the Fort Bend Drainage District at 1.6 cents. That's been the average tax rate we've had. It's a little higher this year because we're paying for a engineering study. We try to make certain we keep your taxes low, and that will go back down. but $25 a month is what you pay to the Fort Bend County Drainage District. That generates about countywide about $10 million that provides for the removing the vegetation and desilting. Am I correct on this? Mark is nodding his head yes. So that gives you an idea of the tax that you pay currently. So I understand your concerns about high taxes. I came into office with a pledge to reduce your taxes. When I came into office, the combined tax was 66 cents. Today it's 46 cents. So I think I've been successful in doing that. I'm always looking out for your taxes.
And I would encourage you to do this. The Fort Bend County Appraisal District keeps a roll and a list on a PDF on the website, and you can go and look up. There are various levee improvement districts, mud districts, and the drainage district that I mentioned earlier. Look at their tax rates and see what comparable districts have as their tax rate, and you can see how that varies if you want to get a range, but that's all publicly available on the CAD website, fbcad.org, if you want to see an example of what has been done elsewhere.
And you might also like to look at Willow Fork when it began in 1990. They were at $1 per $100 valuation in 1990.
The question says that Willow Fork started at $1, and they have come down since.
That's pretty strange.
Let us try to get through some of these little break questions, okay? All right. This is from Lori Villarreal. I understand you were misquoted in covering FortBend.com as saying the cost per house would be $17, but you said this is wrong. Can you please explain what you meant?
Okay. I'm going to apologize. The gentleman who wrote that is standing in right here. Raise your hand, Dennis. Dennis Spellman, covering Katie and covering Fort Bend. And he and I very much appreciate him being here. He's always attempting to get the facts and get the information out. And we had a very long conversation, which we talked about a number of things. We talked about, obviously, this project, this meeting, what Fort Bend County was looking at. In our discussion, I was explaining to him that based on the information I got from the people in Jones Creek with regard to what they tell me they are currently paying and what they tell me they may have to pay, and I'm not saying all of them did this, they told me that their insurance was going to go from $700 to $4,000 if they don't have something done. And so that was the number that he used. And then I changed subject on him, I guess, at some point in time when I started talking about what had been proposed. I don't know if I mentioned that Grady Preston is one of the county commissioners on the court. In fact, the longest serving commissioner, he's been there 28 years, had suggested that, hey, we could have a bond issue of $180 million or thereabouts. And if you do the numbers, that works out to $17. So I use that as an example. In our conversation, I probably changed subject on him and he didn't catch it. And that's my fault. I'm sorry? Anyway, so that, that was based on a proposal by one of the county commissioners that necessarily what we're going to do, but that was simply a suggestion he makes, and maybe something we end up doing. As I say, he's now the dean of the court, and he tends to have it. And, he's been here a long time, very smart guy, and so that may be something if he proposed it. And currently, Fort Bend County Commissioners Court has 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I'm one of the 2 Republicans. The other Republican is Vincent Morales in Precinct 1. And Grady Precious is the Democrat, and he is the longest serving, not only the longest serving on the court, he's the longest serving county official in the county at this time.
Let me bring Mark back up real quick. And Mayor Boudreaux raised a point that's also in some of these questions. Let's talk very specifically about the benefits of a detention basin. What physically does a detention basin do to water flow, to water along Bessie's Creek? What would the impact or what would the benefit be from doing the project?
Okay, I'm just going to talk in general numbers, so don't quote me on any of these things. But in general, let's say there's 3,000 cubic feet per second. That's how much water would be flowing out of Water County. It may be more, it may be less, but let's just say it's 3,000 cubic feet per second. And so up at the county line or near the county line, we put a detention pond adjacent to the channel. And so when the channel is flowing 3/4 full, no water spills out of the creek and goes into the detention pond. The creek still flows 3/4 full and carries that water. But when the creek gets to an excessive level or to a higher level, water begins to spill out of the creek and into the detention pond. And so we kind of knock some of the peak off that 3,000 cubic feet per second. I think the numbers we're talking about is 600, 625 cubic feet per second we knock off. So instead of having 3,000 cubic feet per second flowing all the way down Bessie's Creek to the river, we knock it down to 2,225 cubic feet per second or something like that. So everybody gets the benefit because we've cut the peak flow rate down in the channel. Does it solve everybody's problem? I don't know. Some people could be in some very low areas. Some people may have drainage problems that are on lateral streams that try to drain into Bessie's Creek at other locations. But in general, what we're talking about is taking the bulk of the flow that comes out of Water County, shaving some of that peak flow rate off, and reducing it in the channel all the way downstream. And then as the channel recedes in level, the detention pond will gradually drain out through a controlled structure, a low flow pipe, which will allow it to completely empty itself, so when the next storm comes, the whole process can start over again.
If it becomes full, what is the plan?
Bessie's Creek actually joined in these floods.
Wait a second, I can't see who's asking where we're coming from.
I'm asking.
Yes.
I'm saying, how does that help when the Brazos River was up so high that it joined Bessie's Creek and flooded the whole area? How are you going to maintain that?
Well, when you have even just a Brazos River flood, and I've flown in a helicopter and seen the Brazos River leave the river and go into Bessie's Creek upstream of Fort Bend County, and in that case, that detention pond serves a very small purpose, but in reality, you got 45,000 square miles of Brazos River watershed upstream of Fort Bend County, and so when a river flood, all bets are off. We're talking in a local rainfall event, there's 16.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. Today our numbers are 12.5, but we're converting over to 16.5. So that's the issue we're talking about, is a local rain event when the Bessie's Creek watershed, not a river flood.
Mark, can you very briefly explain how the Atlas 14 calculations for the floodplain would be impacted? Like, part of the discussion here, of course, is who's in the floodplain, who's not in the floodplain. How does that detention basin potentially impact?
The map while you're talking about that?
The floodplain map that he showed you a while ago, that's a preliminary map that FEMA did. Everybody in the Bessie Creek watershed they had a zone A floodplain, that's an approximate floodplain. There was no detailed study on it. When people came in and wanted to build houses and go to Rick Stegley's office to say, hey, how high do we have to build? We're having to guesstimate what FEMA is showing the floodplain boundary at and what the elevation is. So we went back several years ago and asked FEMA to update and do a detailed study in the Bessie Creek watershed, put actual elevations, put what we call a zone AE floodplain there, where there are actually elevations, so that anybody, you can go on our floodplain map and look at these maps and say, oh, the water's 111 here, and then all you have to know is, okay, my ground's 113, I'm not in a floodplain, or my ground's 109, I'm 2 feet in the floodplain. So we've done that. But when we go to this Atlas 14 and the rainfall changes from 12.5 to 16.5 inches, our floodplain is going to go up. When they say 32%, that's how much the rainfall increases. That's not necessarily saying the water is going to increase 32% in elevation, because that water is going to spread out longer distances. But a lot of folks that aren't in the floodplain could be included in the floodplain as a result of the Atlas 14 rainfall. The study that we're doing, a watershed study for the whole county in Bessie's Creek, is one of the priority ones, and as I said earlier, should be finished sometime around November. We are using Atlas 14 numbers. We're going to do a reasonable analysis to determine what the floodplain should be approximately in an Atlas 14 rainfall, and that information will be brought to the public before it's made an official report, and you guys can have the opportunity to comment on that. Also in this study, we're looking at what are options to reduce that floodplain within the channel. Would it be channelization? Would it be a diversion channel to the river? Would it be detention ponds? Would it be a combination of the 3 of these? But as was pointed out a minute ago, this is local rain, 16.5 inches in the Bessie's Creek watershed. When we get a river flood, that's a totally different game. The river flood is out of the scope of this project, and we had done a quick study to see what it would take to reduce the flood on the river from a 100-year rainfall to a 10-year rainfall. You're talking $5.2 billion worth of work and about 6,800 acres of land and 2.8 million yards of excavation. Significant project. The county can't afford that.
Can you point to Bessie Creek on the map, please?
Can you fix the map so we can see it?
Yeah, put it on
I can only do so much. I'm only human here. This is Bessie's Creek coming right through here. The river is back over here. Brookshire Creek is coming in back over here.
Where's 1093?
1093 is right down, I'm not even sure it's on the map, it's down here pretty good ways. These maps are available at the FEMA website. You can go look at them there. They're not on our website because they're preliminary. I had to go grab them off FEMA's website and send them in.
When does that Atlas 14 legislation go into effect?
Atlas 14 is not necessarily legislation, it's the National Weather Service. National Weather Service put out a report in 1960, it's called TP40, Technical Paper 40, which said 100-year rainfall is 12.5 inches in 24 hours. They did it for the whole nation, and everybody knew what their rainfall was. And so that was the number Fort Bend County's been using since 1960, and FEMA honored that number. Now the National Weather Service has taken the additional rainfall they've had over the past 60 or 70 years since 1960, and they've averaged that in with the previous rainfall, and they said, oh, we've had more rainfall in the past 60 years than we've had previously, and so when we average these numbers out now based on the rainfall gauges that we're monitoring, the rainfall for Fort Bend County is roughly 16.5 inches. It varies from one side of the county to the other, but to try to stay uniform, we've come up with a single number of 16.5 inches.
On that particular point, I'm a skeptic by nature. I don't trust the federal government. I know that sounds kind of weird, somebody who works for the government, but I do not trust the federal government. So as a consequence, I had a motion that was 3 weeks ago, I believe, to ask for an independent expert to review NOAA's raw data and review their calculation to absolutely basically convince us, if you want to say that, that their determination of a 32% increase in rainfall for a 100-year event is reasonable. So we're still trying to find that expert, by the way. There's not a lot of people out there that's not associated with NOAA that is out there for us to get, and that's what I want to do. So that process is in place, and if it's not if the conclusion is that it's questionable, we're going to actually challenge it. So, but right now we're operating on the basis that that it is going to be a 16.5 inches, and so we're basically instructing, if I understand correctly, the developers to develop to that standard. Am I correct?
Correct. We're going through kind of an interim change. There's some developers that have some infrastructure in place, and if they have a section that's already platted, we're requiring them to build the slabs up in to that higher elevation, but we don't want them to go back and change the existing infrastructure. That their infrastructure is designed on 12.5 inches. If they have new sections coming in, we're requiring them to start using the Atlas 14 rainfall or a new development. Any new development comes in, their Atlas 14 requirements, and as October 19th of this 2019, all developments will be Atlas 14. We're trying to give the developments that are ongoing and have some infrastructure in place a little bit of leeway, but we're telling them it's coming. And when October 2019 gets here, it's Atlas 14 for everybody.
We need to move on because we're going to start running out of time. This lady's been waiting.
Okay, it just seems like, and from everything that I'm hearing and okay, you're asking our residents to get behind. You're asking our residents to get behind this bond issue. You're asking our residents to get behind a detention pond up north. The engineering study is not done. It seems to me like the cart is before the horse. And what Mark Vogler just said, we don't know until the engineering study is done what exactly is going to work to mitigate flooding in this whole area. It could be a combination of things. I've been at several events where Mark Vogler has spoken, and he said this for months. So I get that legislation only meets every 2 years, but what's the hurry? It's going to flood. It's not going to change anything. We need the best information possible to make the best decisions. Otherwise, we're not helping anybody, especially here.
You're exactly right. Exactly. And this is why we started the process. We're building an airplane on the runway. We absolutely are.
And that's wrong. I'm sorry.
That's where we found.
It's not safe to fly.
At the beginning of the meeting, Commissioner said, and everyone nodded in agreement, Harvey was new. And Harvey's changed a lot of the impact. The Atlas 14 that's come out since only released about 4 months ago.
But just because Harvey happened doesn't mean we have to react badly because Harvey happened.
Yes, ma'am. But as Mark just finished saying, we do have to go for the Atlas 14 numbers.
Right, and that's a great thing.
And one of the things that we're looking at doing is the application from TDM, because it shouldn't all fall upon you. The Waller County water already falls upon you. And if we do something, exactly, the river is always going to be a problem for you. There's always going to be issues that come from the proximity here to the Brazos River. The option is to do nothing. And if the community says do nothing, we hear you.
Let me make certain we understand what our situation is. I wish we had this engineering study completed. Okay, I wish I had all that information. I wish I had enough time to have done all of that, gotten all that done. I had 10 days to get an application in order to preserve the opportunity to get the federal grant in the first place. Had we missed that, we wouldn't have this meeting and would not have a flood mitigation project on the horizon. Now, I'm sure there's no way you're going to pay about $30 million or more for a flood control project. That's too expensive. We have an opportunity to get 75% of the funds for a flood mitigation project funded by the state, by the federal government, and we're working on the opportunity to get the other 25% funded by the state or the county. Now, I'm out of time. I had to have the application in by the 31st. We managed to make that deadline. There's a deadline in which we're going to have to accept the grant. We're going to have to make a decision that we are going to accept the money and move forward. I can't wait 2 years for another legislative session to come around. I don't think we're going to have that time to do that. So if we end up waiting, we're going to lose the federal grant. So that's the reason we're trying to move this thing. We're trying to do things kind of in parallel, get the legislation in place, get the engineering study done. We're doing the best we can with the information we have, but our objective was to make certain we had an opportunity to get the money in the first place. If we don't get the money, we can't do a flood control project, flood mitigation project, period. So that's what we're attempting to do. We're trying to, if you don't want a flood mitigation project, please raise your hand and let us know. We'll forget it. I mean, really and truly, we're not here to hurt you. We're here trying to help you, and we're trying to do our best to do that.
Is the legislature going to pick up the...
Let's have Dr. Zerwas come up. Dr. Zerwas is, of course, your state representative and sits as the chairman of the appropriations in the Texas House.
Good morning. Let me just speak to the how things work as we go through an every other year legislative process. 140 consecutive days, includes weekends, includes holidays, so it is from that 2nd January of this year, 2nd Tuesday in January to Memorial Day. And then we are done. And there are various deadlines that are in there in terms of filing bills. The deadline for filing bills of a major policy nature and stuff has passed. That passed yesterday, in fact. But for local bills, of which is the conversation today, there's a much later date. It's about another 45 days down the road. I think the key here is that, yes, we're a state that lives with an every other year legislature. I happen to support that. I think the less we're up there trying to make laws, the better for you and for me. And so, I think when we go up there, though, there are urgent issues that we need to try to address. As the commissioner has said, we work through the counties, the state works through the counties, and together, we try to understand what are the needs of the region and what is the desire of the constituents that live in that area. Sometimes we have to get going fast on some things, and in fact, that was the case with these two bills, the Jones Creek and the Bessie's Creek bill, is to at least get them drafted. And I won't go into too many weeds here, but to get a bill drafted, it has to go to a group called the Legislative Council. It's about 100 lawyers that you lock up in the dark rooms, and they write bills. They write the law for us, and that takes time. And as time goes forward, they get busier and busier, and the opportunity to be able to get your bill back starts to go away. And then I've got to get on the phone, make special calls to them, and try to get my bill moved to the front. So by putting these bills at least in the hopper and back in my office, it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, the constituents clearly say they want it, file the bill, pull the trigger, and let's start moving down the road, which is not an easy way. If they say no, then like Bessie's Creek bill right now is, there's some concern that there's constituents are not necessarily happy with that. We're going to sit on it, but sitting on it doesn't kill it. Filing it doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to occur. As I like to say, the legislature is highly effective at killing bills. It does it incredibly well. And so the fact that a bill is filed doesn't mean that it's going to go through. The fact that a bill gets heard in committee and gets out of committee doesn't mean that it gets over to the Senate. Remember, there's another thing in this legislature called the Senate, and they have to do the same thing we did, and we have to agree that it's together before it can even get to the governor's desk, and then the governor can veto it if he doesn't like it. So, it is a very, very arduous process, again, designed to, trip bills up more than get bills through. This being a local bill, it has a little bit more opportunity to get through because it only affects a group of people. And so the representative and the senator are considered to be the ones who have, had the contact with the constituents and move the bill forward. So it can get on a fast track a little bit quicker But right now, these bills, Jones Creek is filed, I think yesterday we filed it, 4011, but that doesn't mean it's going anywhere yet. It has to be referred to a committee, it has to be heard in a committee, has to get out of committee, and then has to be heard on the House floor, then has to get off of our floor over to the Senate, where the whole process starts again. And again, you know, we're halfway through the legislative session right now, so you can see that we need to at least be positioned to do something if that is your desire. There's no harm done in doing that. It does, you know, sometimes generate some conversation, and that's what we need. That's exactly what we need, is to kind of understand, you know, is this something that works for you, or is it not something that works for you? And we'll continue to do that for the next 70 days, about 50 of them, of which are really important in terms of really getting things done and getting across.
And would it be fair to say that with the Jones Creek legislation, as we anticipate what happens with the Atlas 14, and as we anticipate what the future ramifications would be, that legislation is moving forward in an attempt to leverage those federal dollars?
Oh, absolutely. And let me just speak to the other side of this. There's the establishment of the districts, and then as the commissioner said, there is this effort to try to find money via the rainy day fund for a local match, which is also something that we want to get going and make sure that happens. There are several bills out there to do that. These are bigger, major bills out there. They have a much higher hurdle to get through than the local bills do. But I have signed on to 2 or 3 of those bills, and they're looking at, you know, pulling big money out of the rainy day fund, billions of dollars, perhaps even creating general obligation bonds in order to meet these local matches. You know, there's a few things that are really, really big on our radar screen right now. It's school safety, school finance. It's bringing your property taxes down and making those something that we can all live with. And it is Hurricane Harvey. Those are the top items that we're dealing with this legislative session. And the Harvey issue is about creating the bills that can actually leverage money out of the rainy day fund. That requires a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to make that happen. It's
a civics lesson and demonstration here today. As I mentioned earlier, in 2017 and 2018, as those federal funds were appropriated by Congress, we are now at the step where we have to decide how those funds are spent. Dr. Zerwas with the appropriations, with the rainy day funds, the county, special districts, everyone is now part of the process all the way down the chain that began with President Trump and Congress 2 years ago, with the funds that were appropriated, the billions for disaster recovery, disaster mitigation. We're now so far down the chain, we're to the point where we're here having these discussions. That money that started in DC with the president is now here, and that's what we're here discussing today. That's where we are.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, because of the commissioner's efforts and Fort Bend County Court overall, we are in a very enviable position to be able to leverage those monies. We have the ability to really come up with the match money, especially if the state contributes to it, which personally I think they should. You know, we are very, very well positioned to execute on some of these potential mitigation activities and stuff. So this is really, it's about, you know, teaming this up, making sure we can put ourselves in the best position. If again, though, it's the desire of the community to do so. There are communities out there, frankly, I will tell you, they don't have the resources and the ability to even be in the game to access these mitigation grants. Fort Bend County is incredibly well led and well positioned to be able to take advantage of that. Again, if it is the desire of the community.
We're getting down to the time where we have to absolutely all be out of here by 11:30. I want to make sure we're getting the biggest questions answered. And Cinda, we've talked a lot with you, a lot.
This is for Representative Zerwas concerning the other flooding. The state has the emphasis, they're going to come out with a state flood plan. And reading through the assessment of it, there are going to be multiple sources of funding for projects. So this is not that we will never have another opportunity.
This isn't the last
for
effort.
You know, this, you might speak to that this.
No federal funding.
There are tremendous,
no federal funding.
There are tremendous funding sources that were mentioned in the state assessment that will be available for flooding projects, floodplain projects.
Right. I mean, you know, the best thing for us to do is to access federal funding. That's your and my tax dollars going up. Let's bring them back. Let's do good things with that money. Right now, we're a state that gives more taxes up than we get back, and this is certainly an effort to do that. And we always want to try to exhaust it. Are there other opportunities for funding sources to do things? Yes, there are. But none of them are as good as a 25 to 75% match, and I think that's the issue that we have here is we may not have that opportunity in the future. And if we think that ultimately the projects are going to be the same, or it's a desire of the constituents, or not, then we can at least say we didn't get caught, sitting back on our heels and letting federal money pass us by.
Will you change your position on Bessie's Creek?
I have no position on Bessie's Creek other than I have a bill that is drafted but not filed, and until I have a clear understanding of where the community is on Bessie's Creek, I won't file it, so, and the commissioner knows that, and again, I just want to be sure that if that is the desire to do something, then at least from a technical point of view, we've got the legislation written and it's ready to go.
I would say it's according to if your house flooded or not.
Why don't you ask us today?
His house did flood.
I only had a couple of inches in my house. You had 4 feet.
I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I have plenty of, I'm right there with y'all as far as having experienced it, been boat rescued, the whole 9 yards. So listen, I think I really fully understand the impact. I live in the Jones Creek district, or that's the watershed area that I would be impacted by personally. But again, this is an issue for the community to decide. And for me, the responsible thing for me to do is if the community says they want it, the last thing I want to do in my office is say, well, we didn't really think you wanted it, and now the legislative council can't draft legislation, and now that deadline has hit, and now I can't do anything. I have not served you well in that capacity. So I at least want to be sure that if this is a viable project in the eyes of the community, and the commissioner's office has worked incredibly hard on it, then let's be ready to move on it. If it's not, then it won't. And even in the Jones Creek thing, that legislation is filed. But that can be stopped at numerous places if it's the opinion of the community that this is not a good idea.
He just mentioned something I want to emphasize, viable project. Project is still a fluid term. I don't mean to be a pun here, and Mark, if you can come up again, the application process is to give us the ability to make the study. The detention basin or a combination of other solutions is on the table still, is that correct?
That's correct, and for both watersheds, both Jones Creek and Bessie Creek.
The project itself may or may not include other things besides a detention basin. It may include a detention basin or it may not. Is that also correct?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that we are trying to study the highest and best use of federal funds to keep people from flooding and to get us into a situation where less people are impacted by the floodplain remap?
Absolutely.
We are running out of time a little bit. We'll take a few more questions here.
May I make a comment?
This gentleman in the blue shirt. Yes, sir.
First, I want to thank y'all for coming, right? I mean, you're taking personal time out to represent.
Our job. We'll just do our job. That's how we're doing.
I know how it is. I really do. You know I know. But Dr. Zerwas, my question to you is, what can we do? Because water runs downhill, right? A lot of us in here are from the Simonton area on this side by the river, affected by the river. Then you have Bessie, then you have Jones. Fine. Water runs downhill. It crosses over somewhere. What are we doing to get a bigger picture, to look north of us and work with the legislature and the federal government to say, look, Brazos River needs work. Somebody's got to do it, right? Somebody's got to do it from the north coming down. If we only want to protect Fort Bend, we're going to lose. It's not about just Fort Bend. It's about everybody north of us. We've already mentioned Waller County floods into Bessie Creek. It has a large amount of water that they're going to be building substations. They're going to be pouring in. You have no control over that. So it's back to the legislature and a bigger view of what's happening north of us and how do we as a state address that and get federal money. And I guess I'll look for you guys too.
Yeah, great question. You know, what in the bigger picture of things, what is the state doing to look at what are all the potential mitigating things, including the Brazos River, including the Colorado River. And so, yeah, so there is activity going on. The governor has identified these particular activities in his plan that he had Chancellor Sharp lead for us in terms of looking at the Harvey rebuild and restore efforts and things like that. Those things are happening. They aren't going to be anything that is going to deliver to us, I think, in the next year or two necessarily. And a lot of that is, frankly, is federal government requirements for them to do that kind of stuff. What I will say is you know, we are blessed with a significant rainy day account, over $15 billion. This account is there for various reasons. There is no doubt, it's absolutely the opinion of your legislature that we need to tap into that money to do the things that are necessary in whatever fashion. Obviously, you want to get the most mileage out of your money, and it may be bonding and so forth. But you know, in terms of looking at the big picture, those activities are going on, and you know, we'll just continue to work on those things and determine what the best response.
This gentleman in the back, yes, sir, been very patient.
Hey, let me take you a bite. How about that? Okay. You're welcome.
I would like to ask the panel, are there any discussions about raising the bridge over the FM 1093 bridge over Bessie's Creek? Because 100 years ago when the MKT put in the railroad bridge, that bridge is about 8 feet higher than the road bridge, which actually goes down toward the Bessie's Creek. It seems like it needs to be raised.
That's a TxDOT problem. That's a state problem, right?
So
1093 is a state road.
To answer that question, after Harvey, the county was asked to recommend projects that would benefit the area. The raising of several areas of 1093 were provided to TxDOT. What they do with them from that point really is beyond our control. But it raised the bridge over Bessie's Creek. It was raised the bridge over the Brazos River as well. But that is a very expensive process. We are talking to them on 723 when it gets rebuilt to make sure that it doesn't go underwater. So yes, we are proposing those things. Whether that actually goes forward, we don't know.
All right, Tommy, you are the last question, then we have to wrap up.
We'll see how fast this is.
All right, I just, the gentleman said it, but I wanted to thank each of you for being here today, for John Zerwas, our representative, Commissioner Myers, and then all of the staff. So I appreciate everyone being pretty cordial for the whole meeting. We live right in the division of Bessie's Creek and Jones Creek watershed. We live at the south end of Bodark Lane, where Bessie's Creek nearly empties into the Brazos River. And I can tell you, the floodwaters from Bessie's Creek has been very threatening to our livelihoods and our home. I've walked in our neighbor's yard in rubber boots when they were walking out of their house that was flooded. Both of you flooded. Many of you here today, your homes have flooded. And I served as the mayor of the city of FUlshear for 6 years, and I worked with then Mayor McJunkin, and just our conversations, the small cities on this side of Fort Bend County, FUlshear, Weston Lakes, and Simonton. I haven't spoke to any of the elected officials there, so this is my own opinion. We don't have the funds to put forward for a project of this magnitude. In FUlshear, we did a study of the lower Bodark area. It came up, several $1 million. There's no way the city could fund that right now, just with the growth that's happening there and the other priorities that are there. So I appreciate, first of all, the stance that you have on trying to use the rainy day fund first, looking to the county fund second, and then also having this option of the Bessie's Creek Flood Control District as an option to help solve our problems here. I appreciate the opportunity for us as a community to be proactive. I spoke with Representative Zerwas, and a lot of times they only hear from the folks who may be against an issue, and so I'm encouraging you, whether you're against it or if you're for it, let them know. And I've got some letters here, sample letters if you're for it. I'm in favor of it personally. There are questions to ask, but I think our community would elect very good representative board members who will have straight thinking on their heads and would do a good job for our community. It's up to us to elect those board members and to represent us well. And so I thank you.
Two more things. Ma'am, which page will your Facebook Live be on?
FUlshear Forum.
All right, FUlshear Forum will have the live stream of this available. I'm assuming it'll be archived on the Facebook page. You, sir, in the green shirt?
Yeah, thank you. I've only lived here for 10 years, but it seems like most of the most recent floods have been directly or indirectly involved with the Brazos River. And as Mark said, once the river's included, all bets are off. It seems like in a scenario like that, a 200-acre retention pond upstream would be a simple.
It all depends on the individual event.
Yeah, so, I guess I have a question because I've only lived here for that amount of time. Are there instances, I recall once when Bessie's Creek started to go into the back end of Valley Lodge, I believe, but aren't most of our flooding problems directly related or indirectly related to the residents?
Well, let me make a comment. I personally serve on a mud board.
Okay.
Let me make a comment. I personally serve on a mud board, and I work with them in my capacity professionally. When there are projects out there and they're done through special districts, other developers, it's always the taxpayers who pay for them. And it's always done locally 100%. And so if there's an opportunity to go out there and do something that we anticipate is going to need to be done, something that's going to have to be done to protect people, and they may not even live here yet, but if they even have an opportunity currently for current residents to take them out of the floodplain as FEMA looks to redraw the maps, things that are going to be done, tax dollars are going to be spent at some point. We have a chance with the application to leverage federal funds now, and that's the reason we're here today, is to talk about what process can be done to leverage the funds. Who else?
I'm here representing Con Hill. Con Hill is in the northernmost part of Fort Bend County. I feel like our community is being targeted. We're a small rural community. We have a lot of retarded folks. We're on fixed incomes. We have young families with small children. So when you look at Fort Bend County shouldering the highest tax rate of the whole state, layer on top of that the taxes that we will need to pay for this project, and then grabbing our land through eminent domain and condemnation. This will have a devastating effect on our community. We've already said this is beneficial for Twinwood. Twinwood owns 1,500 acres next to us. They own thousands and thousands of acres. Why can't they shoulder the responsibility of the detention basin and no eminent domain on private properties?
Well, I have already spoken with Twinwood. They are the largest landowner out here. The most likely place to put the detention is obviously someplace on in that 16,000 acres that they own that is not developable, that is lowland. We could, I've suggested it, hey, we could make you a 260, 300 acre lake, amenity lake that is an improvement to your community for you to develop around it that can serve as this large detention basin that protects this area. Those are ongoing conversations we're having with them. Their question to me is, okay, where's the engineering study, which is a legitimate question. And as I said earlier, I wish we had all this information ahead of time, but had I been able to predict that we were going to have 36 inches of rain from Harvey, ladies and gentlemen, I would have bought flood insurance and saved myself $95,000. I would have done that, but unfortunately, no one knew that was going to happen. So we're in the process of getting all that information together. We have to run this parallel because we don't know the time limit with regard to when we have to, a deadline in which we have to accept the federal grant funds that we've gone after. We have to have a local funding source, state first, county second, and hopefully we don't have to actually utilize a special district, but I don't want to be in a situation where the state says we can't come up with enough money or we can only come up with 20% of the 25% match, and the county said, well, a countywide program is $1.5 billion, we can't do that, and then I don't have a local entity that is able to come up with $2 to $4 million. So,
we gotta go.
I'm sorry?
We gotta go.
All right, 4 minutes.
Can you give your cell phone number?
Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like for you to consider what we talked about here today. If you have any questions, you contact our office. You can go to our website, precinct3.com. It's TRGEE, by the way, not the number. Or you can, and if you will pull out your phone, I'm going to give you my personal cell number. Okay? I'm going to give you my personal cell number so that you can work me at 2 o'clock in the morning if you wish to. 4 o'clock? No, that's 4 o'clock. Okay, all right, now if you're ready, here's my personal cell number. Okay? It is 832-338-1199. I carry it with me at all times.
It sits next to my bed, and it has gone off in the middle of the night. I'm sorry? Repeat it? 832-338-1199. Please communicate with Dr. Zerwas in my office with regard to whether or not you're in favor of a flood mitigation project for this area, and we'll dial all that in. And if you're not in favor of it, we're going to forget this whole thing. If you are in favor of it, we're going to try to move forward. Fair enough?
Contact information is located in the back. And by the way, Mark Vogler is going to be headed over to Dozier's for lunch. He's more than willing to meet with you guys at Dozier's. So, by all means, go bother Mark.
Thank you all very much for being here.